People at the back want to come forward, fill out at the front. We're a little bit sparse at the front, and then it begins to thicken up towards the back. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this ResPublica event on construction and growth, co-hosted with Construction Skills. Their leaflets are on the chairs around you. Construction for Growth, a major important campaign about trying to get Britain's construction industry growing again. This is obviously a tremendously important sector for our economy. It's about 8% of the British economy, and it has really been in the doldrums for, well, basically since the banking crash. Last year, construction contracted 9%. Tens of thousands of jobs have been lost, and it's extremely important that we find ways of getting this sector moving again, which is why this particular campaign, C4G, is so important and well worth learning about a little bit more. If you want to tweet during our slightly computerized, computer-sounding session, there is a hashtag which I've temporarily lost. It's hash RP Fringe, ResPublica Fringe. So do Twitter away if you feel inspired to do so. We have an excellent panel, of course, to talk about these issues. To my immediate left is Jake Berry, PPS to the Conservative Party chairman, Grant Shapps, and also a member of the all-party parliamentary group on apprenticeships. Judy Lowe is on my right, from deputy chairman from Construction Skills, and then Mike Whitby on my far left, over there from the Conservative group of Birmingham City Council, and then Phillip Blond on my far right from Director of ResPublica. So, Jake, could I start? I'll start with you. Sorry about that, and please fire away.
Thank you very much. I, of course, was told I was going last, so I thought I'd listen to everyone else.
I want to keep you on your toes.
Absolutely. My background before I came into politics is law, and also we had a family business in the construction sector, and I specialised in housing, so I like to think that I belong to the construction or the housing industry. And immediately following the election, I really started visiting all the businesses in my patch who were involved in that sector, and they had lots of young people working there. And when I said, are these young people from our local area, they said no. That is deeply depressing. And the reason is that they are not leaving school with the menu of skills that local businesses want to recruit people from our area. So we've got to do something about that. And also at the same time, it was a similar sort of time as the riots. I started talking to a lot of young people who frankly said, you know, I'm depressed about my future. I think that the future I will have is going to be worse than my parents'. And I think all of us have to be determined to change that. So as my personal campaign to change that, I launched a 100 and 100 campaign, which is a simple but scary commitment that I, as the local MP, will get 100 young people, 100 apprenticeships in 100 days. I visited loads of businesses, D.H. Weisters, who knew that the biggest silk manufacturer in the UK was based in Darwin. I'm the MP for Darwin and I didn't know that. And as I walked around and had a look at all these fantastic looms, weaving among other things, ties like this, I noticed that everybody operating those looms was over 50. So as part of my 100 and 100 campaign, we got young people back into industry, back onto building sites where they felt excluded from. And actually in 100 days we recruited 183 young people into proper apprenticeships. That is key to getting our construction sector going. It is key to getting our economy going. Apprenticeships cannot be the Matalan suit. They have to be the Savile Row suit tailored to your business. And when we can provide that, people will rush to take apprentices on. In my last business, we had young people who worked from 16. We thought they were the best employees because they grew up in our business. So if we're going to have a successful economy, we have to get apprenticeships as part of it. And Ed Miliband talked about the forgotten 50%, and actually that is a brilliant catchphrase. What he didn't go on to say is they were the ones who forgot about the 50% who were going into vocational training. They contaminated vocational training by putting in the mind of every parent that the only worthwhile thing your child could do is go to university. And it's not the only worthwhile thing they can do. And we, as a Conservative coalition government, have to ensure that we can decontaminate apprenticeships. In my own industry, law, it took me 6 years to become a lawyer. In law, through the apprenticeship and the vocational route, I could become a lawyer in 5 years. And actually, when I recruited people, if I'd have had one candidate in front of me who'd been to Oxbridge and then to law school but never lived in the real world, and another candidate who'd worked in the industry for 5 years, I would take the person who'd gone down the vocational route. So we've got to decontaminate the idea of vocational training in parents' minds. And final two things I think we can do to actually start to make a difference. We have to get Britain building again. Building is the best way of creating jobs and growth in our economy. It is the most immediate thing we can do to kickstart our economy. We talk about rebalancing to manufacturing. One thing we've done in this country, and we've always done it well, is manufactured homes, manufactured offices and manufactured factories. Not only do we build them here, but 93% of the construction products are made in this country. So if we get Britain building again, it will be a huge fillip to our economy. And finally, touching on manufacturing, and I have the great privilege, like I'm sure some of the Birmingham MPs, of having manufacturing as the largest sector in my constituency. The government must do more, and I hope that at the autumn statement we'll see this government come out, get behind manufacturing and talk about things like increasing capital allowances on industrial machinery, increasing capital allowances on industrial buildings, which will get the economy going, construction and manufacturing. We've got to back Britain, we've got to get young people into work, and I think they're two very good ways we can start.
Over to you.
Thank you. As Sam's already said, I represent Construction Industry Training Board, and we are one of the last of the great old industry training boards that raises 250 million each year in statutory levy from 28,000 companies. So that gives us a hell of a lot of money to put back into apprenticeships, which we'll be pleased about. We train 15,000 apprentices every year, and on top of that 25,000 adults. And we give each apprentice going up to level 3 £10,500. So it's a really serious commitment to get more apprentices into construction. Obviously that base of 28,000 companies gives us a good positioning at the heart of UK construction from the micro level, where we have people called construction development advisors, 350 of them, who in the last year, I'm reliably told, did 30,000 one-to-ones with little construction businesses to help them see the way through this awful couple of years of recession. And from that right through to the macro level, where for Crossrail we have set up and are running Cllr, the Tunnelling and Underground Construction Academy out at Ilford, which I recommend you to go and have a look at. It's an absolutely fantastic facility. And if there is an advantage to having to attend all three party conferences, it's the side conversations that you can have. So if nothing else has come out of three conferences, for me it's that last week I was able to talk to the team who are, same here, they're having a day of talking about Thames Tideway Tunnel, and able to get them to commit to taking on the 400 apprentices that will have been trained in Crossrail if at the end of Crossrail there are not projects for those apprentices. So that's great. So we've got 400 apprentices lined up with work for at least a decade, which is a good start anyway. I was also able last week to talk to Sizewell C, the team from there, about what are going to be the skills needs, because it takes us 3 years to train people up. We had a good discussion. At the end of it, we decided that given UK infrastructure's reputation for starting projects late and finishing them even later, if we wanted to do anything, we should probably go into the first year of the Suffolk primary schools and see whether there are any children there who might perhaps one day be interested in working on site at Sizewell C. But obviously, as Jake's just indicated, and as politicians and policymakers are increasingly recognising at last, construction really is an amazing engine for economic growth. We commissioned some Comres research which said that 71% of Conservative politicians now believe, quotes, government could be doing more to stimulate local growth through construction. Great, let's see that converted into policy. We also know from that research that politicians always say, you in construction, you don't talk with one voice. And I say to them, yes, we're actually not the energy industry, where you can name the companies on fingers of two hands. And I explained the structure that we're 250,000 companies, of whom only 28,000 have a payroll of greater than £100,000 per annum. And we're the top 405 companies turn over as much as the next 27,595. So it's kind of tough to get one voice from that. But it's in a response to that at CITB we've launched our Construction for Growth campaign that you see the leaflets about. So I'd say to all of you, because you're in the industry or related to it, if tomorrow you just reach that point where you can't hear another political promise, walk 100 yards down the square towards the new library, the Carillion site. We've got a bunch of apprentices there who've built a wall for us that MPs are signing as part of their commitment to growth. And tomorrow we've also got Mark Prisk and Matt Hancock agreeing to come along and signing. There are, of course, a lot of industries who say that they own the holy grail of economic regeneration. But the thing about construction is that it delivers everywhere in the country and in the short, medium and long term. As an industry, until recently, it was exactly the same size as the financial services industry. I get very tired of hearing we are over-dependent on financial services. Technically speaking, we're not. We're just over-obsessed with financial services. Construction is the same size and, by the way, employs 4 times as many people. So anyway, back to the short, medium and long term for employment in construction. You might expect me to say housing for the short term, but I've been to 2 conferences now, and I know that people who are really seriously in that side of the business say that there are actually a lot of obstacles to getting it moving quickly, however necessary it is. So housing isn't really the instant solution. And as an economic driver anyway, sadly, you can tell politicians the economics of the statistics don't stack up, because construction at the moment, 8% of the economy. Of that, private housing new build is 12%. So that gives you 0.96% of our economy. Whatever you do to 0.96 of the economy, you're not really going to get it moving again. And also, in the best year we've ever had since 1918 for new house building, we managed to add, do any of you know what percent we increased housing by in this country? 0.8%. So housing's great, housing's important, but don't let MPs off the hook saying housing's going to solve everything. So we need a different solution. And the obvious answer in the short term is repair and maintenance. 26 million homes in need of repair, refurb, either to get them habitable, get them up to energy performance standards, or to meet our carbon targets. I know Mike said in an earlier session that he has houses in Birmingham with a net present value of minus £27,000. That's the kind of thing we could start on tomorrow. Or indeed the shovel-ready projects that are there in infrastructure, in roads and rail. The other thing about repair and maintenance, apart from being able to start tomorrow, is that it generates more jobs than any other form of construction. 3,200 jobs for every 100 million you put into repair and maintenance. It's also a programme, not a project. I spend a lot of time talking to politicians about the difference. Project, one locality, lot of money, probably a lot of economic benefit, but it's not like a programme. A programme is something that is everywhere, like Building Schools for the Future or Hospital PFI. So the benefits go everywhere. And so repair and maintenance reaches the part of the construction economy other projects can't reach. And of every £1 you spend on construction, 90p stays locally. And I would say in my experience on site over a number of years with Bovis, that 90p gets spent on a Twix bar. The problem, of course, is when did any of you last hear an MP saying, I'm going to put X billion pounds into repair and maintenance? They don't, because they love announcing iconic projects. And all of us in the industry and the trade know that iconic is a word we dread because it means slow, expensive, and by the time it's actually finished, probably no longer fit for purpose. So in the medium term, construction will offer government the kinds of projects that elsewhere in Europe would be short term. So £14 billion Crossrail. I actually heard an MP earlier today to say we took the bold step of unlocking this package, and I wanted to say, yes, 25 years after Heseltine first announced it. John Cridland of the CBI was saying he was delighted to learn last week that they're going to create a toll relief road on the A14, which he describes as a 2-lane car park. And then, when he was in the middle of his celebrations, he heard that the first sod will be turned in 2016. So there we are. And then there's a £600 million Mersey Gateway project, which is one of the top 100 in Europe. This is all part of what the Infrastructure Alliance called infrastructure as an enabler to get the rest of the economy working. So in the long term from construction, we obviously have nuclear. We're already talking at Hinkley Point and Energy Island about the skills training needs for those 17,000 jobs, and maybe even by 2026, high speed too. So how do we propose to fund it all? The answer is, ladies and gentlemen, you are already funding it. There are 188,000 construction workers out of employment. The cost of paying them to not work is £8 billion. It has to be a no-brainer. There's a better way of spending £8 billion than keeping construction workers not in employment. So that's why we're promoting construction for growth to government. We're asking them for a consistent approach to investment, whether it's high-speed rail or the lamented Green Deal, and a political will to recognise that financial services are not the only game in town. Given that, we, you in the industry, can do the rest. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks very much.
Just to correct one observation, what I said at the previous meeting is that we inherited housing stock that had an average house net negative value of 27,000. What we did, and what we would continue to do as a city, because I want to actually align what big cities can do to complement the government's growth agenda. And what we did is we borrowed £800 million and we refurbed all of our houses. So we have about 60,000 council houses, and £800 million invested has already yielded a £1.7 billion balance sheet. And what the government might want to look at is if we, as a city, the largest local authority in the United Kingdom, can do that at a local level, and then basically borrow against our asset to grow even more regeneration, which may or may not include construction, and we'll touch on that in a minute or two, then in fact we will be an engine of growth for the United Kingdom, but specifically knowing what we need to do here in the city of Birmingham. So that's what we did. Now already we're doing 10,000 retrofits to improve our housing stock so that the carbon emissions reduced down. That's good public-private sector partnership. The thing that the City of Birmingham has done, I've led this city for the last 8 years, second longest serving leader for the City of Birmingham. I'm no longer the leader now, but we basically have transformed our housing stock. We announced in 2008, whilst the government was going to at that time reduce its carbon emissions by, I think it's about 35% by 2026 here in Birmingham, we said we'd reduce it by 60%. And the way we would do that, ironically, was through how we construct and develop and grow well. One of the recent statistics that have just come out only a week or so ago, and you are personifying it, is that in 2011, 33.5 million people visited the City of Birmingham. In 2005, 29 million people visited the City of Birmingham. The reason why they're visiting is far-sighted vision as to where this city ought to be. It has no divine right to succeed, has to have a global relevance, to attract a whole range of investments. Come here now to see the city. It is not by accident that currently going through our planning committee and or our construction industry, we're building 28 new hotels. Now, this NEC site is growing. We're investing further money not far from here, £40 million in the NIA. All of that is to, on the one hand, make us relevant, attract people to us, and then around that we need connectivity. The connectivity equation then is infrastructure development. So it's not by accident that Birmingham now, without the HS2, is carrying out 7 of the largest infrastructure developments. I have the library here at the back, which we announced in 2007. We insisted that whoever participates in any of our infrastructure developments, which is a partnership of £6 billion worth of public money and £21 billion worth of private sector money, that's a good ratio for a government that's expending 1 to 4. Then look at their apprenticeship schemes. They must have those, and Carillion have entered, but has Amy under our PFI 2.7 billion for redoing our roads, as have Network Rail, who are doing New Street Station, which is £648 million. Many of you might have come through. So we're doing that anyway. So how do we accelerate even further? Well, what we have done as a city is we then said to the world, not to Manchester, not to London, not to wherever it is. We're in a global market. We have to be relevant. And if we're to attract the sovereign funds, who are now speaking to us, you would not normally do, we have now at the moment 2 of the major sovereign funds looking at the asset base that Birmingham has. We own 40% as a city council of the assets in the City of Birmingham, and how we align those assets through partnership. And on the housing development, we're building about 3,000 council-owned homes. They'll be mixed tenure, but we'll be giving the land to the developer. Then we'll be actually taking overage on the return, and there'll be mixed tenure as well. So we're doing a whole plethora of actions to actually ultimately stimulate the infrastructural developments. What I would say is this. We have a major development out in Longbridge, where the Chinese now have taken over Rover, it's SIAC. They initially were going to close it down. They were employing 500 people there. There's some land as well. We're going to build about 700 houses there next to Bronze Grove. And I spoke to the construction people. I have a regular dialogue with all the international, local, regional construction companies. This is a dilemma for the government, but it's a realistic commercial assessment as well. Before they buy the land, clearly they'll look at the cost of the land. Then they'll look at what they'll build that property for, and then they'll look at what the disposable income is in that area. And one of the sad things for the Midlands is that whereas your average wage 6 years ago was about £27,500, it's dramatically reduced. And what's out of sync is the value of the land to the cost of borrowing to the return for the construction company. And what the government and local government leaders have to work out is how you entice the private sector to get that balance right. Should taxpayers' money always be given to the private sector to take the speculation that they should, in a commercial sense do? Now, I'm a Conservative leader, But I think that balance is a difficult one to negotiate. So ultimately for me, Mr. Chairman, the panacea is this. You need good dynamic cities, and ours is one of those. We've got literally a whole range of infrastructure developments going on. We're certainly driving apprenticeships. We gave 1.5 acres of land not long ago, and Lord Baker and I opened up the first new technical academy for apprentices, 700 of those. We've liaised through procurement and insisted with our private sector partners that they employ people locally if they can, but certainly teach people. And then we're saying we will go out to the world and bring money in, and then we need to have the connectivity question answered. So I didn't mention HS2, but we believe that HS2 complements what we're doing, complements a massive growth in our airport, complements the, dare I say, the projection of a United Kingdom that is not a one-stop shop, and that in fact then you enrich yourself through the 96,000 university students in this city that want to work, want to add value, and dare I say, want an opportunity.
Well, thanks. Thank you very much. I didn't know, Jake, that 93% of the supply chain was locally sourced.
No. 93% of construction products are sourced from this country.
Isn't that amazing? I didn't know that, nor did I know that 95% or 90% in every pound. That's a local industry. My goodness, that's fantastic. I think the value-added comparison for the car industry is about 30%. So in that sense, construction really delivers a massive multiplier effect. Well, I wanted to talk about skills, and I want to talk about vocational skills. And in order to platform that, let me just give you some figures that are slightly disconcerting. The UK remains less productive in terms of GDP per hour work than countries such as the US, France and Germany. Estimates show that up to 1/5 of this productivity gap can be explained by the lack of skills in the UK. And some more facts on what is clearly a skills gap. 1 in 10 of some 16 to 18-year-olds are not in employment or training. This is between 200,000 to 300,000 per year, depending on the time it's measured. Perhaps even more worryingly, the UK is only 19th in the OECD for those who get at least GCSE level qualifications. So we're only 19th, and that shows you how extreme it is. The UK has a very poor basic level of literacy and numeracy. 16% of 16 to 65-year-olds have below level 1 literacy, and 21% have below level 3 maths. And these are levels associated with functional literacy and numeracy. So there are just some points and some ideas, and 42% of employers are worried about the level of skills that we get. So I think if we're serious about addressing this, and if we're serious about addressing the needs of these multiplier industries such as construction, we've got to radically rethink our vocational training. And as I think Jake said earlier, the way in which we demean that aspect, and the way in which we say you can only succeed if A, you escape from your community, and B, if you go to university and get a degree, is in effect condemns a huge proportion of our population to failure before they start. And one of the things, and I'm very impressed, I don't know if any of you have read Eric Schmidt's point in Google. In my book, I also argued this. We still have a 19th century education system that isn't yet fit for a 21st century world. What we do is we urge that people specialise at a very, very early age, and they specialise in arts or sciences. Whereas any successful 21st century economy needs, in effect, people who are skilled in arts and sciences. And why do you need to be skilled in arts? Because you need to learn teamwork, you need to learn how to argue, you need to learn how to escape from a certain way of looking and produce a new framework for interrogation. Why do you need the sciences? Because you need basic analytic skills. Yet everything in our education system, almost from the age of 11, forces you to choose. And every single employer wants to integrate. So not only do we choose and separate our young people into these two streams, our universities demand specialisation as well. And a lot of the pressure for specialisations comes from universities that say, oh, we don't get enough proper maths undergraduates, or we don't get enough proper people in physics, and so on and so forth. So what I want to suggest to you first of all is we need to fundamentally change the structures of our degrees. And one of the things I'm working on at ResPublica with colleagues is the idea that we need to break our whole degree programs into 2-year degrees with a 2-year degree that essentially is your MA level taken at in later life. So what I'm suggesting is that we do all students go at the age of 18, instead of wasting that year, they do a 2-year degree. They get a BA honours degree in that general applicability, and then they become able to move into certain industries. Then at a later date, can be in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s. In relationship with your employer, you go back to study. And you study for 2 years, and it can be on the job, it can be extended, and then you get your equivalent of your honours and your master's degree. Now this would work because the level of money you'd have to borrow to originally fund that 3rd year would actually be far less because you're funding it much later. Plus your employer would help support that. And then you create an idea of on-the-job training so that people can specialise and actually move their skill levels up. Because what's happening now in the United Kingdom is high-level skill vacancies are rising, but so is unemployment. For the first time in our economy, we've broken the link between vacancies and unemployment. And that's because we're not producing people who are skilled or specialised enough to go into that. And that is fatal. That is fatal for our society. Now, allied with that, changing the fundamental structure of our degree programme, I'd suggest we also need to follow a German approach to vocational training. Now what's interesting about a German approach to vocational training is at a very early age, and it can vary depending which state you're in, and you are streamed, and you are streamed into an academic or a vocational stream. And the stream that goes into vocational model trains essentially from the ages of 11 right up through to 18. In very specific, employer-specific technical skills. So much so that by the age of 18, the Germans can produce somebody who can work in high-level industry. The equivalent age for a Briton is 27. And that's the skills gap that we have. Now the Germans, who were rather worried about their level of technical training, actually made their technical training more academic because they were concerned that the split was too explicit. And I recognise streaming is problematic, and we need to have kind of points at which people can move between it. But fundamentally, unless we're serious about vocational education, unless we introduce it as another option, not a lesser option, but an equally valid skilled option, then we're not going to produce the skills that our economy needs. And this is why I think the vocational baccalaureate is so interesting, and 20 schools are now running with it from this September. And the educational baccalaureate, which is an international standard, the baccalaureate is far superior to our A-levels anyway, actually gives an academic standard to vocational training that I think if we could only follow that back and follow that right back through to those whom education fails, and remember education fails at least 50% of us, probably more, then we can actually tackle some of these frightening figures that are holding us back. And so, really, I think what I'd like to do is tack these kind of skills suggestions onto the suggestions that colleagues have mentioned. And if we can do that, if we can rethink both our standard university offer and our our secondary offer, then we can actually start to create the skills so that Britain can compete. The terrible thing is that at the moment, all the medium skills that you have, all the things that can be standardised are soon going to be the subject of both automation and competition. They already have in Korea robots teaching students English, and they do it very well. The way the modern economy is going, and the Resolution Foundation did some very good work about that, lots of skills at the bottom, very few skills in the middle, but lots of demand for skills at the top. So if we want to stop our people essentially being condemned to a perpetual existence on low wages, it's imperative that we change the vocational offer in our country and get to a position where we're delivering the high-level skills that will deliver for not just the construction industry, but for all of our industries. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Philip, and thanks for all the contributions. Mike, I know you need to slip away a little bit early, but can I, before you escape, can I pick up on a couple of themes? I suppose the impact of government policy on local development is the one I'm interested in. Judy mentioned this issue of iconic projects, the sense that the government is very focused on big, bulky, one-off investments. You mentioned HS2, and that this can actually ignore some of the real value added on the ground that can happen from other forms of investment. What sort of government intervention do you think is needed to beyond those big HS2 style monolithic projects?
Well, I don't think they're monolithic or dinosaur in that sense. I actually think the HS2 stacks up, and I've made the case for that in a different forum. What I do think HS2 does, it addresses the fact that the United Kingdom has to grow its main urban areas. Unless all the urban populations are going to move elsewhere, we need to have prosperity in those urban areas. And by themselves, the cities are already innovating. And what would I like the government to do? And they've gone some way towards it. If you look at Chicago, they have tax incremental finance. And through that, what you would do as a city with a local agenda, in partnership with the private sector nevertheless, is you'd hypothecate the return on the increase of the business rate. And because we actually have a Moody 3A rating, the city of Birmingham has probably a better financial rating than most nation states. And literally against our prudential borrowing capacity, although I have to say the coalition government had just capped that, we would be able to show, in partnership with land, against a whole range of strategic developments, sometimes aligned to a national development like the HS2. I see the HS2 complementing our airport expansion. I see it complementing a New Street Station, which was built to actually cope with 60 million people in 1966, and it's taken till now. It's cracking at the seams at 33, and overnight it will bring in 52 million people. I see that aligned to the airport, aligned to the PFI that's actually improving our roads and our trains, and getting people around, because HS2 is about bringing the United Kingdom together. So best practice can be shared at almost like one local region rather than having disparate regions. And so we're already going so far in attracting inward investment. The latest FDI statistics show that Birmingham is gaining more foreign direct investment than any other region in the United Kingdom outside of London. Now London's got the edge, always will have. It's got the Queen, it's got Parliament, it's got the heritage. So we have to punch our weight because we're real and relevant. So if you can get a Birmingham city everywhere in all our cities doing what it's doing, complementing the United Kingdom's growth agenda, aligning against a strategic infrastructural project like HS2 that brings us all closer together, then I think it's good value for money. HS2 on its own, without what we've done, might be questionable, but actually I believe it will add value. In terms of our airport, for instance, is 10 million passengers at the moment. For £1 billion worth of expenditure, that runway will take another 10 million passengers. If we spend £4 billion, we can take 35 million passengers. Now, what the United Kingdom wants, let me say this, I go to China regularly. When the Premier of China first came to Britain, Premier Wen Jiabao, he didn't go to London first, he actually came to Birmingham first to see the investment that the Chinese had made in Longbridge to see the cars coming off the track. So this epicentral nature that we sometimes have needs to actually be diluted a little. Came here, the Chinese investors have no, it's not an anathema to them to actually go anywhere else other than London. We need the connectivity that they require, nevertheless, to get here. And that's where HS2, the airport, and these major construction projects will go. So I wouldn't call them iconic, because there are people that try to make out that is ego tripping. They have to be economically sound, they have to be practical and pragmatic, and who owns the money and who owns the land. I'm not, the public sector will play a role, the private sector will play a role, so I'm not doctrinal in that sense. So I don't think HS2 is iconic, I think it has a value, I think it can align itself to our city aspiration, and I actually think cities can complement the United Kingdom's growth agenda.
Jake, a strong argument for HS2, when is it actually going to happen?
Well, I don't see any reason that it will be delayed, and I actually agree with you. HS2 is a fantastic idea. Being a Northern MP, I think we have to do as much as we can to connect the north and south and bridge this north-south divide, which clearly exists. You know, we are kidding ourselves if we think that it doesn't. London will always have the edge. I like to think Liverpool's next. But you know, I'll let Birmingham.
I agree with you, Joe. I want to be clear on that.
We actually used to be next door neighbours at one point, so we both agree on that. But actually, going away from these iconic projects, the truth is we need things like HS2. We need to expand our airports, but we need to do everything else as well. And actually, that's what's so exciting about the Green Deal, which is investment in our existing housing stock with the greening of existing homes, which is actually the best way by far to get our carbon impact down. But we need to continue with other things like the Decent Homes programme and ensure that we invest in our housing stock. That all creates jobs and growth. And it is hugely important that we continue with the improvement of our housing stock in this country, albeit a very small part of our economy, but a very important one of that. And there's one other thing as well which I think we also have to look at. There is no incentive whatsoever at the moment for anyone to do any speculative development in the commercial arena. If I won the lottery tomorrow and someone came to me and said, will you lend me £1 million to build an office block, I would say no. And the problem is that we have vacant rates on commercial buildings. So if you build a building and you don't have a tenant to go into it, it is a liability. It can be £200,000–300,000 a year for these big industrial sheds to hold those businesses vacant. That is why people aren't building commercial buildings. We have to do something about vacant rates. I think it's actually wrong in principle that we are taxing commercial developers on their stock. It's like me walking into Tesco's and counting the number of bottles of Timotei on the shelf and saying, give me all of that now. But they haven't sold it yet. All developers have vacant commercial stock, and they won't build any more until we tackle vacant rates. So I hope that the Chancellor will have that in mind when it comes to the autumn statement, because I think that's been one of the biggest detrimental factors playing on construction in the commercial property sector.
Phillip, can I ask, what's your sense of this debate about how to use the government's balance sheet in terms of investment? Should it be used directly, i.e. should the government be directly funding, the way Ed suggested, Lowe Party Conference, directly funding construction, or should it be underwriting construction, which might has raised a couple of concerns about it?
I think what's interesting is the failure of all government's attempts to fund small businesses. And I think that's because they profoundly don't understand what the problem is. If one can use the metaphor of a heart and the circulatory system, they keep thinking the problem is the heart. So they keep putting different pumps in it. But what there is a complete collapse of the circulatory system. So there's no way, what we lack in this country are intermediate institutions that make good judgments about lending to small businesses. They're not there. So whatever, sorry? They used to be what banks are doing with QE is essentially protecting their balance sheets. And what banks, one of the differences, if you look at what are the three successful regions of Europe for small businesses, the Ruhr Valley, Catalonia and Lombardy. What do all of them have? All of them have intermediate lending institutions that can judge asymmetric risk. They can judge what's a good bet and what isn't. We don't have that because our banks have essentially retreated from lending, so they've destroyed the circulatory system. It's a bit like that Made in Britain, everything's made by a computer. So what our lenders do is they group the whole sector into one block, they call an average, and it's not worth lending to the block. They've destroyed judgment within the lending sector. So my view is that we have to reintroduce intermediary associations in order to lend. Now I argued, gosh, how long is it now? 4 years ago, that the post office should be a vehicle for quantitative easing, and that the post office should be a vehicle through which QE is delivered. Now, I support QE, and the fundamental argument for quantitative easing is lowering bond prices, which it's done, but it can't get any lower. And the point is now QE has to change its object, but there's nothing out there. There's no way that QE can move directly from the banks to businesses. Actually, if you go onto the Bank of England website and look at and do their latest pattern of gilts versus bonds, they've got something like 33 million of corporate bonds and 1.6 trillion or something like that of government bonds. So it's just not getting out there. So the interesting question to ask is, how can we channel QE to businesses? And I think we fundamentally need a new security vehicle for SMEs. We need a new investment and delivery vehicle. I've got some ideas about that, and I think that the Federation of Small Business and the Chambers of Commerce could become vehicles for that sort of judgment and for that sort of loan. And I think if the aim of QE is to lower bond prices, it's succeeded. But if the aim of QE is to get credit out to the rest of the country, it hasn't succeeded. And the reason it hasn't is the banks are just shoring up their balance sheets. And they're borrowing money from the government to lend out at higher rates. It's ridiculous. So new institutions. And on the note that colleagues were chatting about growth, we did a paper, we've got another 4 coming out, but this was our last one, on local bonds. And one of the reasons that none of these bond issuances, when the Chancellor talks about we'll guarantee this, we'll guarantee that, nobody knows how to access them. Nobody knows how to facilitate them. And what we need is a form of instrument that local authorities and local entities can deploy that they know will be funded regardless. And that's what we propose. We propose a community infrastructure bond, a bottom-up bond that essentially can be supported by any revenue raising, can be car parking charges, can be traffic rates, can be any form of local taxation you want. And as long as it's valid, then the government should be able to say, we'll back it. And it's only that, in terms of getting your micro businesses moving across, that will do it. I mean, paradoxically, the terrible thing is the Treasury is contemptuous of localism. And actually, only localism can deliver what the Treasury wants. And it's interesting that now the Treasury are trying to develop these local investment vehicles, when actually the much derided big society narrative was arguing for it 3-4 years ago.
I was only half joking when I said that the banks used to be what we had between government and the micro business. But you talked about Germany having a very different apprenticeship model. They, of course, also have a very different funding model. And what we do lack is any equivalent of either the Landesbank, the bank that's just focused on one region, or the industry bank, the iron and steel bank. You couldn't imagine having an iron and steel bank in England. Or indeed the Bank for Wiederaufbau, the bank for redevelopment. And unfortunately, we don't have that kind of a structure, and it's no use saying we can put it in, because it takes 100 years for something like that to be really trusted.
We are getting a British business bank, I think, allegedly, aren't we, in a year or so?
Won't make
well, you say allegedly in a year or so.
Probably won't make loans until after the election.
Yeah. But I think that's part of the problem. You're right. There is a gap, and the banks, our conventional banks, have turned their backs completely on small business.
If you look at Europe,
and medium business.
If you look at Europe, what Europe did after the Second World War is it deployed all of its financial reserves, all of its banks, and turned them inwards. It deployed all of its savings, delivered them through savings to exactly the type of local banks, and were forbidden to lend beyond their locality. And that's what drove Europe up until the early 70s. You had to have growth rates in Europe of up to 6% until the oil crisis. And it's that deployment of our internal savings, our pensions funds, the aggregation, and then the pushing of that into local delivery. But we've got none of that infrastructure. We've got a city of London that throws our capital abroad. And we also underpin the delocalisation of capital because we offer explicit and implicit guarantees that lowers the risk on that capital that in effect prices out the local economy. So our own government is guaranteeing that capital can't be invested locally for sufficient return because it's giving inflated returns for speculative capital. And it's about time we started talking about a patriotic capital that we reward and incentivise. And I particularly, which is your remark about vacancy rates in another sector.
Let me throw it open to questions. There's, wow, hands already coming up.
Land, our food producing capability, and one of our major industries, tourism, attracted by how beautiful the rural areas are. I feel that this is one hell of a cost. I think your factories and offices could be filled if goods were being produced. It doesn't matter who subs their emptiness. That's what you're talking about, who should sub their emptiness. If you were using the Earth's renewable resources, as we always have in the Northwest, potteries in Staffordshire, agriculture in Cheshire, textiles in Lancashire and Yorkshire, renewable resources, you'd soon have those factories and offices filled. As it is, if you put more and more under concrete, oh dear, people envy us for our green and pleasant land. Now, to look at the illness rather than these symptoms. Is it not demographic features? Every house has to have one adult in it now, not two. When we were kids, there was one fridge, one garage, one... I know, we've gone beyond that.
We need a question.
Yeah, an uncontrolled policy of immigration and every adult wanting a house for themselves. Those are two big, undealt with areas. And I think they're giving rise for the need for a lot of this development on our green and pleasant land. And it worries me for the future, because once we've got rid of that under concrete, we'll never get it back.
Okay, can I just pick one point up on this, the point of the concreting over of Britain? I mean, planning is being gradually relaxed. Do you think that process is going in the right direction?
I mean, I do. I think there's actually quite a lot of unnecessary fear about this sort of, uncontrolled development. The truth is the Green Belt has actually, we've increased the protection of the Green Belt since the general election. I look at this country and I think we have 250,000 consented but unbuilt planning permissions. If we could wave a magic wand and, I don't know, suddenly found oodles of cash and we could build these houses, it would deal with our housing demand for 1 year. We have a chronic undersupply of housing in this country. The age of a first-time buyer in London is now 38. I'm 33 and I want to be able to buy a home. I want to be able to buy a home where I live locally. So it's absolutely vital if we're going to beat what I call generation rent, which are people my age who are just stuck renting and the rent's more than the mortgage so they can't save for their deposit. If we're going to have a new deal for generation rent, it's absolutely vital that we build more houses. But I just don't recognise the idea of concreting over the countryside. And I'll just pick up on one more point about immigration, which I do think is a concern. I represent a North West constituency. I go out knocking on doors and people tell me that they are concerned about that. And I think the government is getting to grips with immigration. Immigration can also be a tremendously positive thing for our society. We talk about the American dream. I don't think actually the American dream exists. I think it's the American gene. People who have the gasp and go to leave their country to find a better life in another country can contribute tremendously to our society. Tesco's, founded by an immigrant. My father-in-law came in from Hungary in 1956, came here, started his own business, employed people. So we shouldn't be fearful of immigration, but we have to have reasonable controls, and I think that's where this government's going.
Thanks very much. Another question, please.
Thank you, Richard Beamish, Alliance of Sector Skills Council. Just want to bring us back to the title, really, which is Skills and Jobs, and very interested in Judy's point about 188,000 people and the points that all speakers have made about apprenticeships and the importance of apprenticeships. I just wonder what you think about the reality, which is that we keep tinkering, we keep changing systems. We've got the Doug Richard review now on apprenticeships, but we're building on existing problems, and what we need is a strong government that's brave enough, hopefully this one, to actually look at the whole apprenticeship system and the education system and higher education from scratch to sort it out with a fresh start.
Judy, that's a broad challenge. Maybe one way of, please do address the question, but one way of focusing might also be to talk about what Phillip suggested earlier, which is a different way of structuring university, a 2-year BA, then come back to learning later on. What's your reaction to that idea?
Well, taking those together, I know what you mean about tinkering. I think my concern about training at the moment is that John Hayes, I think we'd all agree, was a fantastic minister for apprenticeships. He really got them on the agenda. But by announcing 500,000 apprenticeships, suddenly you've got a 6 weeks stint in a call centre being badged an apprenticeship. If I could achieve one thing, it would be to have a legal definition of an apprenticeship, a minimum duration. Every time I was watching television this lunchtime and wanting to shout at the TV screen saying, ask him how long those apprenticeships last. So I think first of all we have to get clear what an apprenticeship is in a rush to take kids out off the NEET register and make them be doing anything but being a statistical NEET. Then I'm very much in favour of the idea that's been rising not just through what you've said at ResPublica, but across all of the party conferences, that if we're going to have an elite baccalaureate, we must have a technical baccalaureate. And let's make sure, yes, let's look at the German model, let's make sure it's properly founded on skills, pride in the craftsmanship of what you can do with an apprenticeship. And higher education, don't know, I taught in higher education for 20 years, so the idea of picking all of those areas up by the roots and starting all over with apprenticeships, technical baccalaureate and higher education, maybe given the length of time we take for things in this country, I'd be content if we get clear what an apprenticeship is and they're properly trained and properly qualified, and we start now on setting out what a technical baccalaureate means.
Yes, well, I agree with all of that, and I think we all welcome a technical baccalaureate. But I think if we're really serious, and we have to be, and I think that's the spirit of the question, it really requires looking at, you know, all the kids who drop out from age 8 to 16. You know, our education system doesn't work for I would argue, the majority of the country. And I would like to create different streams that recognise different talents and try to ensure that people can move between them and do all the soft type of work that's so crucial to ensure that one isn't given a higher status than another. And one way to do this is to really radically rethink British higher education. It's not an accident that the Massachusetts Institute of Technology is in the top 10 world universities and will remain there. We lack a major, you probably could argue Imperial College, yeah. But we lack something that goes beyond certain sciences to include it all. We lack a major technical university. The Germans have major technical tertiary institutions. We don't. The Germans, I'm on the next session after this, which is about cities. But what the Germans do is they have institutions that bridge, intermediate institutions again, that bridge university and industry in order for commercial viability. Our academic system has been focused on training an elite for empire, and we're still doing that, and it's failing us. And what we need to do is create mass excellence. And mass excellence, in my view, means rethinking. Stop doing mediocrity, start having wider, different institutions. And also move all the specialist winning institutions to become just graduate institutions. So Oxford and Cambridge, in my view, should become graduate excellence institutions. I know, I was at Cambridge, and actually it's an enormous waste of talent. And if we could make those graduate research institutions, you would get the world's greatest minds coming here, and you would produce an institution that would just continue to dominate. And I think rethinking this basis and rethinking British higher education could and should give us those skills.
Interesting to hear your earlier point, Philip, about saying that degrees could be completed in 2 years, and I actually think that's absolutely right, because I did my degree in 2 years, which was a law degree. So if you can do a law degree in 2 years, I would suggest you could do most degrees in 2 years. I also think we need to look at the brand university. Arguably, maybe Margaret Thatcher was right to rebrand all polytechnics back to university. I think that's actually done damage to the idea of what constitutes a university education. I think lots of working class kids from my constituency have been told a bit of a pup, frankly. Since the Labour Party introduced tuition fees, they've gone into masses of debt, and they come out at the other end with a degree which is worthless. And I think the perverse idea, the perverse sort of what we're seeing having increased tuition fees, is people are more and more looking at a university education and saying, well, does this work for me? Actually, would I prefer to go and do a technical apprenticeship in weaving so I can work at the H-Meisters in my constituency? And this is again about decontaminating the vocational route. Lots of factory owners in my patch who I go to speak to started off brushing up, and now they are chief executives of multi-million-pound companies competing internationally. So the vocational route is normally the route of business ownership.
The really terrifying thing is that actually the only businesses who will put on jobs really, in the aggregate, are small businesses. Big businesses succeed by laying off and by getting efficient. Somebody told me a statistic the other day that I haven't verified, but she was very clever, so I tend to believe it. And she told me that from essentially since the beginning of the new century, all the new jobs in America are in small businesses. And what this tells me is, if this is largely true, then what on earth, how can a small business person link up with kind of universities, with apprenticeships, with all of this? Most of our small business groupings, good as they are, and I do like them, do not do this type of work. They don't group, they don't say, let's pool, how do we create pooling and hubbing capacity so that we can pull people in? What we have to do is work with where the jobs are and with where the innovations is, and create a type of pool through which small businesses can recruit.
I'm going to need a microphone against that. I just wanted to come in supporting what you were saying, Jake. We find increasingly as a construction industry training board that we're having more and more young people who have gone to a post-92 university and have come out realising that they've just wasted 3 years of their life to have a qualification that's not recognised by an employer, has not added any value, and a lot of them are coming to us and saying, can we do an apprenticeship so that at least we can get employed? And we shouldn't be putting young people through 6 years of training just to get them employable.
Over the side, please. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks. Alistair Thompson, National Institute of Adult Continuing Education. A quick question to each panel member. Firstly to Jake. Whilst I understand the idea of growing your own young apprenticeships, what about older people? Particularly in construction, after the age of 50 you deteriorate, so you need a reskilling strategy, and one of the things I think John Hayes was really good at was saying that apprentices are lifelong. Second question to Judy. In your presentation you made a compelling case, as far as I could hear, for a statutory training levy. If it works for construction, should it be introduced in other sectors as well? And Phillip, whilst I agree absolutely that the American model of associate degree, 2-year associate degrees in effectively community colleges leading on to full honours degrees works, one of the difficulties of introducing that in a European context is the Bologna Agreement, a voluntary agreement between universities about mutual recognition. At the moment we have a great problem around European countries recognising 1-year master's degrees. If we start messing with it, there's a danger of destabilising the system, isn't there?
Thanks. 3 good questions. Jake.
So I'll pick up on that question first of all. I hope you can hear me. I'm having to shout slightly. We have a huge problem in this country with how we deal with older people in the workforce. If we are going to continue to skill people throughout their career, there has to be really good higher level apprenticeships available for them. Because actually a 55-year-old doesn't want to go to college 1 day a week to be told what he already knows, because he is already an expert in that field. So there has to be a really good high skill, higher level apprenticeship which he can go into and continue to learn while he earns. And just finally to talk more generally about how I think we've actually got the approach wrong to older people in the workplace in the UK. I was with a friend of mine who's at British Energy and works in the nuclear industry, and he said every time he goes to Texas to work over there with his sister company, if they have a problem, they bring in back to the factory everyone who's retired, and they all sit around a table, and the guys who retired say, well actually you're not going to solve that problem that way, because back in 1963 we thought we could solve that problem that way, but it failed. So we lose, every time we retire people, move the older people out of the workplace, we lose that long-term corporate memory, and we have to do much more in this country to ensure that we retain those skills and people still feel valued and able to work well beyond 65. They have a lot to contribute.
Judy, statutory training levy.
Should we have a statutory training levy for other industries? Well, the answer, of course, is that we did have. There were probably a dozen at one time. I wish I had money for every time an MP has asked me, should we introduce a statutory levy, or how can we introduce a statutory levy, followed by, but we'd never get it through the party, let alone through the House. The reason it seems to work in construction is that uniquely it's a very itinerant industry. So the people I worked with on the Olympic site went from there up to the Commonwealth Games site at Glasgow and will then move on from there maybe to Rio. Certainly people were talking about Rio when I was on site at E15. And therefore the ethos is that you train people and you will then get them back having been trained even more by somebody else because of the levy. But other industries aren't project-based, aren't itinerant, and there doesn't appear to be the acceptance. But it would be great if there were a politician who would be bold enough to propose it.
Point on the Bologna Agreement and mutual recognition.
Yeah, I think that what I'm arguing for is essentially everybody does a liberal arts degree for 2 years, so that everybody then is competent across the piece. And I think that's what works in the American educational system. And I think that really helps innovation and productivity. I don't know if there's been any research on that, but that would be very interesting. And then what I favour is a through-life training strategy, and that would be that in effect you combine the third year of your degree with a master's level. And because it's cheaper, because the government saves so much more money, and because your employer has a stake in your excellence, if we can create it as a norm, that at a point that you and your employer think this is when you do your honours stroke MA, that would massively upskill the entire British population. Now, there's different ways to achieve this. I mean, one of the things that's interesting in Italy is you get a personal training budget, and you get a personal training budget funded through higher levels of taxation. And what's interesting about that is that then you can draw it down for certified courses that merit it. And actually what that enables the Italians to do is have through-life training. So I think there's different ways to do it, and it's not either or, and it could be complementary. But one of the key messages from the way the economies are going, the way employment's going, is a country that doesn't have through-life education, that doesn't have through-life skills, will be a country that condemns its citizens to essentially not benefit from globalisation. And so we have to create capital assets for training. We have to. Now that could either be through the university system, as I argue, but what if you don't follow a university system? You still need to be trained. Well, then that could take the form of training credits that anybody who, for instance, doesn't go to university, or isn't subsidised in that way, can also access. And then you have a massive education and training offer. Actually, this, I think, is what a one-nation economics stroke politics would really be, because if you look at the way wages are going, you look at the way training is going, that is almost the only thing you can do to ensure that your population benefits. And if you don't do that, you're in real trouble. And whether it contravenes a voluntary agreement made in Bologna, I'd rather go with educating my population as the preeminent rationale.
At the front, please. Thanks.
Thank you. Richard Jones from the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health. I think the vast majority, and Judy had confirmed this, of construction workers don't ever get to university. If we could just pick up a point Judy made earlier. Not all iconic projects go over time and over budgets, and you mentioned the Olympic Park development, which was a fantastic example, on time, on budget. And
but only because it was the only game in town, and nobody went on strike because there was no prospect of any other work.
But importantly, it had no fatalities,
yes,
and its accident rate was a quarter of the construction industry norm. The construction industry as a whole, though, is generally still very dangerous. We think that the vocational routes, and in particular having basic health and safety and sensible risk management skills taught at an early age, is the way to go. And IOSH has done something to do this. We've created a free teaching resource that's available to all schools. About 5,000 schools and colleges have downloaded this. The question is, does the panel agree with IOSH that getting these basic skills in place at an early age is the way to go instead of relying on the later education system.
Judy.
I would answer the question slightly more widely, that getting basic skills in at an early age is absolutely vital. Obviously, I spent a lot of my time in Bovis. Bovis is passionate about incident and injury-free, that nobody should have to tell a child that their father's been killed on site. And we worked out that every person killed on a construction site affects 70 lives as a minimum. So that I've grown up with. I can still remember the only fatality I've known on Paddington Point, and that was awful. It stays with you for years. So yes, the sooner people get health and safety in their bloodstream rather than as a tick box exercise that's a bore that you have to do. Rather, health and safety has to be something, or rather safety, not health and safety has to be something you care passionately about on any site, because it matters and because lives matter. But the wider issue of getting basic skills in, this now being the third conference that a lot of us have attended, it struck me that in a number of the fringe groups, the issue of basic skills has come up very often. I would have said in answer to the earlier question, it doesn't matter whether the degree takes 2 years, 3 years, 5 years or 7 years. If at the end of it the young person is still unemployable. And a lot of the talk around the fringe groups has been about we've got to get a system that focuses on employability, on the soft skills, on even being able to write and read intelligently, being able to add up, not talking the kind of problems that have hit West Coast Main Line, but just the basic mathematics. So I would say, yes, getting back to basic skills matters, and we should prioritise that over arguing how long a degree should last.
We're going to have to stop. Just time for a very quick last point from Jake and then from Phillip very briefly, and then we'll wrap it up.
I absolutely agree that's the right approach. I mean, health and safety has come so far in this country. We've got away, and I remember them going around with my father, we've got away from the macho building site where people won't wear hard hats because they think it shows something about them. It does, it shows they're a complete idiot if they won't wear it. So I think health and safety from the very start, get young people involved in it, just to get them to talk about risk. And actually knowing about how to manage risk isn't just helping on a building site, it will help you throughout your entire life. So I pay tribute to the work that you and others have done in that arena.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most frightening things about our country is how much culture matters. And, you know, the statistic, it's oft quoted, but it still chills me, is that by the age of 7, the least bright child in a cohort has overtaken, in a high-income cohort, has overtaken the brightest child in a low-income cohort. And that's the terrifying thing for me. And I think I've long argued we need to recover working class culture. And we used to have a very vivid and excellent working class culture with an emphasis to the workers' educational institution where, you know, where you had a genuine sense of the cultural import of education. And think about migrants. Working class people from abroad always privilege education, and that's why their children do so well. But sort of in Britain, so many cultures have lost that. And I think often the most important thing is a cultural question, and how we can revive a working class education culture. That I'd appreciate some help on and some ideas on.
Brilliant point to end on. Thank you very much indeed, everyone, for coming along. Please join me in thanking the panel and enjoy the conference.